The mud sucked at the wagon wheels with a wet, hungry sound that made Zara Everly's heart sink deeper with every failed attempt to move forward. She had been pulling, pushing, and pleading with her oxen for the better part of an hour, but the spring rains had turned this stretch of Kansas prairie into a treacherous mire that refused to release its prize. The wagon, loaded with everything she owned in this world, sat stubbornly in place while the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on her sweat-soaked dress. She had left Independence 3 weeks ago with a small wagon train, but when her father fell ill with fever just outside of Council Grove, they had fallen behind. The wagon master had been sympathetic but firm. They could not wait. Her father died 2 days after the others moved on, and Zara buried him beneath a cottonwood tree with her own blistered hands. Now, at 22 years old, she found herself alone on the prairie with a dead man's dreams and a determination that was rapidly crumbling into despair. The oxen lowed mournfully, their massive shoulders straining against the yoke as she urged them forward once more. The wheels groaned, shifted an inch, then sank back even deeper. Zara felt tears of frustration burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Crying would not free her wagon. Crying would not bring her father back. Crying would not make the remaining miles to Linden, Kansas any shorter. She was preparing to try again when she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching from the west. Zara's hand instinctively went to the rifle propped against the wagon seat, but she forced herself to remain calm. Not every stranger was a threat, though her father had warned her to be cautious of anyone she met on the trail. She shaded her eyes against the sun and watched as a rider crested the low hill. The man who approached was unlike anyone Zara had ever seen. He sat astride a large roan horse with the easy confidence of someone who had spent more time in the saddle than on his feet. As he drew closer, she could see he was massive, with shoulders so broad they seemed to block out the sun behind him. His hair was dark brown, touching his collar in thick waves, and a beard covered the lower half of his face. He wore buckskin pants and a worn shirt that stretched tight across a chest thick with muscle. A rifle rested across his saddle, and she counted at least 3 knives visible on his person. He reined in his horse about 20 feet away, his dark eyes taking in the scene with a quick, assessing glance. Zara stood straighter, trying to appear more capable than she felt. "Looks like you have got yourself in a predicament," the man said, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to come from somewhere in his chest. "I can manage," Zara replied, though even she did not believe her own words. The man dismounted in one smooth motion, and Zara was struck by just how tall he was. He had to be at least 6.5 feet, with arms as thick as tree branches and hands that looked like they could snap a man's neck without effort. But his eyes, when they met hers, held no threat. Instead, she saw something like concern flickering in their depths. "Name is Seth Hardwick," he said, taking a step closer. "I have been trapping up in the mountains north of here, heading down to Linden to trade my furs before summer sets in proper." "Zara Everly," she replied, then added somewhat defensively, "I was traveling with a wagon train, but circumstances changed." Seth's eyes moved to the fresh grave she had marked with stones about 100 yards back. His expression softened almost imperceptibly. "I am sorry for your loss. But you should not be out here alone. It is not safe." "I did not have much choice in the matter," Zara said, feeling her frustration rise again. "And I would be just fine if I could get this blasted wagon free." Seth walked around the wagon, examining the wheels and the depth of the mud. He crouched down, his powerful thighs bulging against the buckskin, and tested the ground with his fingers. When he stood, he was already rolling up his sleeves. "Your oxen are tired," he observed. They have been working this mud for too long. Unhitch them and let them rest. I will get your wagon free. Zara wanted to argue, wanted to insist she could handle it herself, but pride seemed foolish when faced with the very real possibility of being stranded. She moved to the oxen, speaking softly to them as she worked the leather straps. They seemed relieved to be freed from the yoke, and she led them a short distance away to graze on the sparse grass. When she turned back, Seth had positioned himself at the rear of the wagon. He planted his feet wide, gripped the wooden frame, and began to pull. The muscles in his arms bunched and flexed, cords standing out on his neck as he threw his considerable strength into the task. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sucking sound that reminded Zara of a giant's kiss, the wagon lurched backward several inches. Seth did not pause. He adjusted his grip and pulled again, his face set in lines of fierce concentration. The wagon moved again, then again, each pull bringing it further from the worst of the mud. Zara watched in amazement as this mountain of a man accomplished what she and her oxen had been unable to do in over an hour. Finally, with one last tremendous heave, Seth pulled the wagon onto firmer ground. He released his grip and straightened, breathing hard but not gasping. Sweat darkened his shirt, making it cling even more tightly to the impressive landscape of his torso. He wiped his forehead with his sleeve and looked at Zara with something that might have been satisfaction. "There you go," he said simply. "I do not know how to thank you," Zara said, and she meant it. Without his help, she might have been stuck there until she starved or was found by someone with far worse intentions. Seth waved off her thanks. "Where are you headed?" "Linden," Zara replied. "My father had a land claim waiting there. He filed last year and we were coming out to start a farm." Seth was quiet for a moment, his eyes distant. "Linden is still a good 30 miles from here. More if you have to go around the rough spots. You planning to make that journey alone?" "I do not see another option," Zara said, lifting her chin despite the fear that coiled in her stomach at the thought. "The trail gets worse before it gets better," Seth said slowly. "More mud where the creeks have flooded, rocky terrain that can break a wagon wheel if you are not careful. And there are men who would see a woman alone as an opportunity." "Are you trying to frighten me?" Zara asked, though she was already frightened. "I am trying to be honest with you," Seth replied. He seemed to be wrestling with some internal debate. Finally, he said, "I am headed to Linden myself. If you want, I could travel with you. Make sure you get there safe." Zara studied him carefully. Every instinct her father had tried to instill in her screamed that she should be wary of a strange man, especially one who looked like he could tear apart a bear with his bare hands. But those same instincts also told her that Seth Hardwick was not a danger to her. There was something solid about him, something trustworthy in the way he met her eyes without calculation or hunger. "I cannot pay you," she said finally. "Did not ask you to," Seth replied. "But it is a long walk for a man on foot if I am to keep pace with your wagon. I will need to lead my horse." "You would do that?" Zara asked, surprised. "You would walk?" "A horse moves too fast for a loaded wagon," Seth said with a shrug of those massive shoulders. "If I am going to see you safely to Linden, I need to stay close. That means walking." Zara felt something warm unfurl in her chest, something she had not felt since her father's death. Hope, perhaps, or maybe just the relief of not being alone anymore. "Then I accept your offer, Mr. Hardwick. And I am grateful for it." "Seth," he said. "Just Seth." "Then I am just Zara," she replied, and when she smiled, she was surprised to find it felt genuine. They spent the next few minutes preparing to continue the journey. Seth helped her rehitch the oxen, his hands moving with a practiced efficiency that spoke of years on the frontier. He checked the wagon's wheels and axles, tightening a loose bolt he found and pointing out a crack in one of the boards that would need watching. "You have got good supplies," he observed, noting the barrels of flour, salt pork, and beans. "Your father planned well." "He spent 2 years saving for this trip," Zara said quietly. "He wanted to build something, to have land of his own." He worked in a factory in Pittsburgh for 15 years, breathing in coal dust and working 16-hour days. When the doctor told him his lungs were failing, he decided he would rather die under an open sky than in that dark city. "He got his wish then," Seth said, and there was no mockery in his voice, only understanding. They started moving as the afternoon began to stretch toward evening. True to his word, Seth walked beside the wagon, leading his horse by the reins. He set a steady pace that the oxen could maintain without exhausting themselves, and he seemed to have an uncanny ability to spot problem areas before they reached them. "Bear left here," he would say, or "that patch looks soft, swing wide." Each time, Zara followed his guidance and the wagon rolled on without incident. As they walked, they talked. At first, it was just practical conversation about the trail and the weather, but gradually it became more personal. Seth told her about his life in the mountains, about trapping beaver and hunting elk, about nights spent under stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. He spoke of the loneliness too, the long months without seeing another human face, and Zara heard a wistfulness in his voice that surprised her. "Why come down at all?" she asked. "If you love the mountains so much." "A man needs supplies," Seth said. "Salt, gunpowder, coffee. And every now and then he needs to hear another voice besides his own." He glanced at her sideways. "Gets to where you start talking to the trees, and that is when you know it is time to seek civilization." Zara laughed, and the sound startled her. She had not laughed since her father fell ill. "Do the trees talk back?" "Not yet," Seth said, and there was a hint of humor in his gruff voice. "But I figure I am only a season or two away from that." She asked him about his family, and his face grew somber. "Parents died of cholera when I was 16, he said. "Had a younger sister, but she passed the same winter. After that, I headed west. Could not see much point in staying where everything reminded me of what I had lost." "I am sorry," Zara said softly. "That must have been terrible." "It was a long time ago," Seth replied, but she could hear the old pain underneath his words. "What about you? Any family besides your father?" "My mother died giving birth to my brother when I was 10, Zara said. "The baby died too. After that, it was just me and my father. He never remarried. I think he loved her too much to ever consider replacing her." "That is a rare kind of love," Seth observed. "It is," Zara agreed. "He used to say that some people are lucky enough to find their other half, and once you have, you cannot settle for less." They fell into a comfortable silence after that. The only sounds the creaking of the wagon, the plodding footsteps of the oxen, and the occasional call of a bird overhead. Zara found herself stealing glances at Seth as they walked. In profile, his face was all hard angles and weathered planes, the face of a man who had spent years enduring the elements. But there was something about the set of his jaw, the way he constantly scanned their surroundings, that made her feel protected. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the prairie in shades of gold and crimson, Seth called for them to stop. "We should make camp," he said. "Another hour and it will be too dark to see hazards." They found a spot near a small creek where the ground was level and relatively dry. Seth helped Zara unhitch the oxen and lead them to water. Then he began gathering firewood while she unpacked supplies for supper. It felt strangely domestic, this division of labor, and Zara caught herself wondering what it would be like to do this every night, to have someone to share the endless tasks of frontier life. Seth built the fire with the same efficiency he brought to everything else, and soon flames were crackling cheerfully in the gathering dusk. Zara had brought out salt pork and beans, and she began preparing them in her cast iron pot while Seth saw to his horse. He brushed the animal down thoroughly, speaking to it in low tones that Zara could not quite make out. The tenderness in his gestures surprised her. For all his size and obvious strength, Seth Hardwick was gentle with the creatures in his care. "Your horse is beautiful," she said when he returned to the fire. "What is his name?" "Jasper," Seth replied, settling onto the ground with his back against a log. "Had him for 5 years now. He was a wild Mustang when I found him, half-starved and mean as a snake. Took me 3 months to gentle him, but once he decided to trust me, he became the finest horse I have ever had." "You have a way with animals," Zara observed, stirring the beans. "Animals are honest," Seth said. "They do not lie or pretend to be something they are not. Treat them fair and they will do the same." "I wish more people were like that," Zara said without thinking. Seth looked at her curiously. "Someone treat you unfair?" Zara hesitated, then decided there was no harm in telling him. "I was engaged once back in Pittsburgh. His name was Thomas, and I thought he loved me. But when my father announced we were heading west, Thomas showed his true colors. He said only fools and failures went west, and if I left with my father, he would not wait for me." "Sounds like you dodged a bullet there," Seth said. "That is what my father said," Zara replied with a small smile. "He told me any man who would not support my choices was not worth having, but it hurt at the time, made me question whether I was making a mistake." "And now?" Seth asked. Zara looked around at the vast prairie, at the endless sky above them, at the fire crackling between them. "Now I think my father was right. Thomas wanted me to fit into his life, to be what he needed. He never once asked what I wanted or what I dreamed about." "What do you dream about?" Seth asked, and there was genuine interest in his voice. "I want land of my own," Zara said, surprised by the passion in her own voice. "I want to build something that lasts, to put down roots and know that I belong somewhere. In the city, we were always just visitors, just workers who could be replaced. Out here, I can make a real home." Seth nodded slowly. "That is a good dream, worth chasing." They ate their simple supper in companionable silence, and afterward, Seth insisted on cleaning the pot and utensils while Zara prepared her bedroll under the wagon. The night had grown cool, and she wrapped herself in blankets while Seth banked the fire and laid out his own bedroll on the opposite side. "You get some sleep," he said quietly. "I will keep first watch." "You do not have to do that," Zara protested. "You must be exhausted from walking all day." "I have gone days without sleep when necessary," Seth replied, "and I am a light sleeper. Anything moves out there, I will hear it." Zara wanted to argue, but the truth was she was exhausted. The emotional toll of her father's death combined with the physical demands of the trail had left her drained. She closed her eyes, intending to rest for just a moment, and fell into a deep sleep almost immediately. She woke once in the night to find Seth still sitting by the fire, his rifle across his knees. The flames cast dancing shadows across his features, making him look even larger and more imposing. But when he noticed her stirring, he gave her a small nod of reassurance, and she felt safe enough to drift back to sleep. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Zara woke to find Seth already up and moving, the fire rekindled and coffee brewing in a battered tin pot. The smell alone was enough to make her stomach growl. "Morning," Seth said, handing her a cup of the strong, dark brew. "We should eat and get moving. We made good time yesterday, but we have got some rough terrain ahead." They broke camp quickly, and within an hour they were back on the trail. Seth had been right about the terrain. By mid-morning, They were navigating a series of rocky hills that required careful maneuvering. More than once, Seth had to help lift the wagon over particularly large stones, his muscles bulging with the effort. Zara found herself mesmerized by the sheer power in his body, the way he could move objects that should have required multiple men. Around noon, they stopped to rest the oxen and eat a cold lunch of dried beef and hardtack. They had found a spot in the shade of a small stand of cottonwoods, and the relative coolness was a welcome relief. "Can I ask you something?" Zara said after they had been sitting in silence for a while. "Go ahead," Seth replied. "Why did you really offer to help me?" she asked. "You do not know me. For all you know, I could be trouble." Seth was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the distant horizon. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "I was not much older than you when I lost my family. I wandered around for months, half crazy with grief, not knowing what to do or where to go. A trapper named Jack Redmond found me trying to cross a river in flood season. I would have drowned if he had not pulled me out. He took me in, taught me how to survive in the mountains, treated me like the son he never had." "What happened to him?" Zara asked softly. "Grizzly got him 3 years back," Seth said, and she could hear the pain in his voice. "He was getting older, slowing down. Should have retired, but he loved the mountains too much to leave them. Before he died, he made me promise something." "What was that?" he said. "Seth, you help folks when you can. Do not matter if it is inconvenient or costs you something. You help because that is what decent people do." Seth looked at her then, his dark eyes intense. "When I saw you stuck in that mud, alone and struggling, I heard Jack's voice clear as day, so I am keeping my promise to him by helping you." Zara felt her throat tighten with emotion. "He sounds like he was a good man." "The best," Seth agreed. "And he was right. We are all just trying to survive out here. Might as well help each other when we can." They continued their journey, and as the hours passed, Zara found herself increasingly aware of Seth's presence. The way he moved with such confidence and grace despite his size. The deep rumble of his voice when he pointed out a hawk circling overhead. The occasional flash of humor that broke through his typically stoic demeanor. She caught herself watching him more often than was probably appropriate, admiring the play of muscles across his back as he walked, the strength in his weathered hands. It was foolish, she told herself. She had known him less than 2 days. She was supposed to be in mourning for her father. And yet, there was something about Seth Hardwick that made her feel alive in a way she had not felt in a very long time. That evening, as they made camp near another small creek, Zara decided to do something special for dinner. She still had a few precious eggs packed in cornmeal to prevent breaking, and she used them to make flapjacks along with fried salt pork. Seth's eyes widened when she handed him his plate. "When was the last time you had eggs?" she asked, amused by his reaction. "Must be 6 months or more," he admitted. "In the mountains, I live on meat, beans, and whatever roots or greens I can find. This is a feast." They ate slowly, savoring every bite, and afterward they sat by the fire talking. Seth told her stories about his years in the mountains, about tracking mountain lions and weathering blizzards in caves. Zara found herself laughing at his descriptions of failed attempts at cooking. At the time, he accidentally sat on a skunk's den and spent a week smelling so bad even his horse avoided him. "I thought nothing could survive smelling that bad," he said with a self-deprecating grin that transformed his usually serious face. "Turned out I was wrong." "How did you finally get rid of the smell?" Zara asked, wiping tears of laughter from her eyes. "Rolled around in mud and ashes for days," Seth said. "Washed in every creek I crossed. Eventually, it faded enough that I could stand myself again. But I have never sat down without checking the ground first since then." As the fire burned down to embers, their conversation turned more serious. Zara told Seth about her childhood, about helping her father in his small vegetable garden behind their tenement building, about dreaming of a place where she could grow more than a few scraggly tomato plants. "My father used to tell me stories about the West," she said softly. "About land so rich you could grow anything, about skies that went on forever, about building a life with your own hands. I think he was telling himself those stories as much as me, trying to believe that something better was possible." "He gave you that land claim," Seth pointed out. "That is something better right there." "I know," Zara said. "I just wish he could have seen it. Wish he could have helped me build the house and plant the first crops. It feels wrong to do it without him." Seth leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his face serious in the firelight. "Your father gave you more than land, Zara. He gave you the courage to come out here, the strength to keep going when things got hard. Every seed you plant, every board you nail, that is going to be honoring his memory. He will be there with you in every bit of it." Zara felt tears sliding down her cheeks, but they were not entirely tears of sadness. "Thank you," she whispered, "for saying that, for helping me, for everything." "Get some rest," Seth said gently. "Tomorrow is another long day." That night, Zara lay in her bedroll thinking about Seth's words, about her father's dreams, about the strange twist of fate that had brought a mountain man to her aid when she needed it most. She fell asleep with a sense of peace she had not felt in weeks. The next 3 days passed in a similar pattern. They would wake at dawn, eat a quick breakfast, and then set out across the prairie. Seth walked tirelessly beside the wagon, his long legs eating up the miles with a steady, ground-covering stride. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories and opinions, debating whether summer or winter was more beautiful in the mountains, whether coffee or tea was the superior beverage, whether a person could ever truly feel at home in more than one place. Zara found herself looking forward to these conversations more than she wanted to admit. Seth had a way of listening that made her feel heard, really heard, perhaps for the first time in her life. He did not interrupt or talk over her. He did not dismiss her opinions as silly or impractical. He simply listened, considered, and responded with thoughtfulness. And when she asked him questions, he answered with an honesty that was sometimes brutal but always genuine. He told her about the loneliness of his life in the mountains, about wondering sometimes if he had been running away from humanity rather than seeking solitude. He talked about seeing families in town during his trading trips and feeling a sharp pang of something he could not quite name. "I used to think I was content," he said one evening as they watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. "Thought I had everything I needed up there, but lately I have been wondering if maybe I was just scared." "Scared of what?" Zara asked. "Of caring about someone and losing them again," Seth admitted. "After my family died, I swore I would never let myself get attached like that. Could not bear the thought of going through that pain again. So I went where there were no people, no attachments, no risk." "That sounds lonely," Zara said softly. "It has been," Seth agreed. "But safe. Lonely but safe." Zara understood that feeling more than she wanted to admit. After Thomas had rejected her, she had built walls around her heart too, telling herself she did not need anyone else. But walking beside Seth day after day, she felt those walls beginning to crumble. On the 4th day, they reached a trading post at the crossroads of 2 major trails. It was a rough structure built of logs, with a corral out back and a hand-painted sign that read Riley's Trading Post and Saloon. Seth suggested they stop to replenish some supplies and let the oxen rest. The proprietor, a weathered man with a magnificent handlebar mustache, greeted them warmly. "Seth Hardwick," he exclaimed. Did not expect to see you until next month. You getting an early start on trading season." "Something like that," Seth replied, shaking the man's hand. "Riley, this is Zara Everly. She is heading to Linden to claim her land." Riley's eyes sharpened with interest. "All alone?" "Not anymore," Seth said, and there was something in his tone that made Riley's eyebrows rise. But the older man had the wisdom to keep his observations to himself. "Well, any friend of Seth's is welcome here," Riley said. "Come on in. I have got some stew on and the coffee is fresh." They spent a pleasant hour in the trading post, eating Riley's surprisingly good venison stew and listening to him gossip about the various travelers who had passed through. Riley also shared news from Linden, which he visited regularly on supply runs. "Town is growing fast," he said. "Must be 30 families there now, maybe more. They have got a proper church, a schoolhouse, even a doctor who settled there last fall. Your land claim is about 2 miles outside town, if I recall the paperwork right." "How do you know about my claim?" Zara asked, surprised. "I handle a lot of the paperwork for homesteaders," Riley explained. "Government office in Linden is not always staffed, so I act as a go-between. Everly, right? 40 acres on the north side of Linden Creek. Good land from what I hear. Should grow crops just fine." Zara felt excitement building in her chest. It was real. The dream her father had chased was actually real, waiting for her just a few more days down the trail. When they left the trading post, Riley pulled Seth aside. Zara pretended not to listen, but she could not help overhearing their conversation. "That is a fine woman you are traveling with," Riley said quietly. "Pretty, smart, and braver than most men I know to be making this journey alone." "I am aware," Seth replied. "You planning to just drop her in Linden and head back to your mountains?" Riley asked. There was a long pause before Seth answered. "I have not decided yet." Riley chuckled. "Son, I have known you for 5 years now. I have never seen you look at anyone the way you look at her. Maybe it is time to ask yourself what you really want." Seth did not respond, but as they continued down the trail, Zara noticed he was quieter than usual, lost in thought. She wondered what he was thinking, whether Riley's words had affected him the way they had affected her. That night after they had made camp and eaten dinner, Seth seemed restless. He kept standing up and walking to the edge of their firelight, staring out at the darkness beyond. Finally, Zara could not stand it anymore. "What is wrong?" she asked. Seth turned to look at her, and in the firelight his expression was troubled. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "When you get to Linden, when you start building on your land, what are you going to do? That is a lot of work for one person." Zara had been trying not to think about that. "I will figure it out. Hire help when I can afford it. Do what I can manage on my own." "It is not going to be easy," Seth said, coming back to sit across from her. "Building a cabin, breaking sod for planting, managing livestock if you get any. That is work that usually takes a family to accomplish." "Are you trying to discourage me?" Zara asked, feeling a flash of defensiveness. "No," Seth said quickly. "I am trying to say something, and I am making a mess of it." Zara waited, her heart suddenly beating faster. "I have been thinking," Seth continued, his words coming slowly as if he was choosing each one carefully, "about what I want, about whether going back to the mountains is really what I should do." "What else would you do?" Zara asked, hardly daring to breathe. Seth looked directly at her, his dark eyes intense. "I could stay in Linden. I've got enough furs to trade for supplies, enough money saved up to get by for a while. I know how to hunt, how to build, how to work land. I could help you with your claim." Zara's mind raced. Was he offering what she thought he was offering? "Why would you do that?" "Because," Seth said, and now his voice was rough with emotion, "because these past few days with you have been the best days I have had in 10 years. Because talking to you does not feel like an obligation, it feels like coming home. Because when I think about walking away and never seeing you again, it feels like someone is twisting a knife in my chest. Zara felt tears spring to her eyes. Seth. I know it is too fast, he continued quickly. I know we barely know each other, but I also know that some things are right from the start, and you feel right, Zara. You feel like the thing I did not know I was looking for all these years. Zara stood up and walked around the fire to where Seth sat. She knelt in front of him, taking his large, calloused hands in her smaller ones. It does not feel too fast to me, she said softly. It feels like the first thing that has made sense since my father died. You make me feel safe, Seth. You make me feel seen. And when I think about building that homestead, the only way I can picture it is with you there. Seth reached up to cup her face with one hand, his thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. I am not good with fancy words, he said. And I do not have much to offer, but what I have, what I am, it is yours if you want it. I want it, Zara whispered. I want you. Seth pulled her gently into his arms, and Zara went willingly, pressing her face against his chest. She could hear his heart pounding, fast and strong, matching the rhythm of her own. They stayed like that for a long moment, holding each other in the firelight while the prairie stretched out around them in all directions. When they finally pulled apart, Seth kept one arm around her shoulders, and Zara leaned into his warmth. They talked late into the night, making plans, sharing dreams, learning even more about each other. Seth told her about his skills in carpentry, learned from his father before the cholera took him. Zara told him about her mother's garden techniques, the little tricks for growing vegetables that had been passed down through generations. We can build a good life, Seth said. It will not be easy, but it will be ours. That is all I want, Zara replied. Something that is ours that we build together. They decided not to rush into marriage, though both of them knew it was inevitable. Zara wanted to see her land first, to understand what they would be building together. Seth agreed, though he insisted they would do everything properly. He would court her, he said, the way she deserved to be courted, even if they were living on the frontier. The remaining days to Linden passed in a haze of happiness. They continued to walk side by side, but now they held hands when the terrain permitted. They talked about the house they would build, debating whether to make it one large room or divide it into separate spaces. They discussed what crops to plant first, what animals they would need, how to make the most of the 40 acres that waited for them. Seth also began teaching Zara things she would need to know. He showed her how to read the weather by watching the clouds, how to identify edible plants, how to track game. He was a patient teacher, never making her feel foolish when she made mistakes, always encouraging her to try again. In turn, Zara taught Seth things she had learned from her father. She shared her knowledge of crop rotation, of preserving food for winter, of managing money and resources. She also taught him songs from her childhood, silly rhymes her mother had sung, and was delighted when his deep voice joined her in the choruses. On the morning of the 7th day since Seth had pulled her wagon from the mud, they crested a low rise and saw Linden spread out in the valley below. It was larger than Zara had expected, with a main street lined with wooden buildings and houses scattered around the edges. She could see the church steeple Riley had mentioned and smoke rising from numerous chimneys. There it is, Seth said softly. Your new home. Our new home, Zara corrected, and Seth smiled, a full, genuine smile that transformed his entire face. They made their way down into town, drawing curious glances from the residents. Several people called out greetings to them, friendly but clearly wondering who they were. Seth guided them to the land office, a small building near the center of town with a sign that read Land Claims and Registry. The clerk, a thin man with spectacles perched on his nose, looked up from his ledger as they entered. "Can I help you?" "My name is Zara Everly," Zara said, trying to keep her voice steady. "My father, Robert Everly, filed a claim here last year. He passed away on the trail, but I am here to fulfill the claim." The clerk's expression softened. "I am sorry for your loss, Miss Everly. Let me check the records." He flipped through his large ledger, running his finger down the columns. "Ah, yes, here it is. 40 acres on the north side of Linden Creek. The claim is valid as long as you begin improvements within 30 days of arrival and prove up within 5 years." "I understand," Zara said. "You will need someone to verify the boundaries with you," the clerk said, glancing between Zara and Seth. "Is this gentleman traveling with you?" "He is," Zara said. "This is Seth Hardwick. He has agreed to help me establish the homestead." The clerk nodded. "Well then, let me get the claim documents for you to sign, and I will mark you as having arrived. Tomorrow, I can ride out with you to show you the exact boundaries." They completed the paperwork, and Zara felt a surge of emotion as she signed her name on the official documents. This was real. She was truly doing this, claiming her father's dream and making it her own. When Seth squeezed her hand encouragingly, she felt like she could accomplish anything. The clerk directed them to a boarding house where they could stay the night. The proprietor, a kind-faced woman named Mrs. Patterson, welcomed them warmly and showed them to separate rooms. That evening, they ate dinner in the boarding house dining room, surrounded by other residents who were eager to meet the newcomers. Zara found herself answering dozens of questions about where they had come from, what their plans were, whether they had family in the area. She noticed that people seemed to assume she and Seth were married, and while she did not actively correct them, she did not confirm it either. Seth, for his part, stayed close to her side, his protective presence making it clear she was not available for courting by any of the single men in town. The next morning, the clerk, whose name was Mr. Henderson, met them with horses for the ride out to the claim. They loaded Zara's wagon with supplies from the general store, Seth insisting on paying for lumber, nails, and tools they would need for building. Zara protested, but he was firm. "We are partners in this," he said. "I contribute what I can, just like you do. Besides, those furs are not doing me any good sitting in a pack." The ride to the claim took about 30 minutes, following the creek north out of town. When they finally reached the property, Zara felt her breath catch in her throat. It was beautiful. The land rolled gently, with the creek running along the southern boundary. There were cottonwood trees clustered along the water, and the rest of the land was covered in tall prairie grass that waved in the morning breeze. In the distance, she could see the rise of low hills, and above it all, the endless Kansas sky stretched blue and clear. "This is it," Mr. Henderson said, consulting his map. 40 acres from the creek north to that line of trees you see in the distance, and from that rock outcropping on the west to the old Buffalo Trail on the east." Zara dismounted and walked onto her land, Seth following close behind. She knelt down and pressed her hands into the soil, feeling its richness, imagining all the things that could grow here. When she looked up at Seth, she was crying, but this time they were tears of joy. "Thank you, Papa," she whispered to the wind. "We made it." Seth helped her to her feet, and they walked the boundaries of the property with Mr. Henderson, marking the corners with stones. By the time they finished, it was midday, and the clerk headed back to town, leaving them alone on their land. "Where should we build?" Zara asked, looking around at the possibilities. Seth studied the terrain with the practiced eye of someone who had survived in the wilderness. "Up there," he said, pointing to a gentle rise about 100 yards from the creek. high enough that you will not flood if the creek rises, but close enough to have easy access to water. Those trees will give you windbreak from the north in winter. And see how the land slopes away. That will give you good drainage. They walked up to the spot he had indicated, and Zara immediately knew he was right. From this vantage point, she could see the whole property, including a view of the town in the distance. It was perfect. "Let's start today," she said impulsively. "I know we need to plan and measure and all of that, but can we at least clear the ground? I need to feel like we are really beginning." Seth smiled and pulled an axe from the wagon. "I was hoping you would say that." They worked until sunset, clearing brush and small saplings from the building site. It was hard physical labor, but Zara found it deeply satisfying. With every swing of her small hatchet, with every armload of brush she dragged away, she was making her mark on this land. Seth worked tirelessly, his powerful arms making short work of obstacles that would have taken her hours to clear. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red, they stood together, surveying their progress. They had cleared an area roughly 20 feet by 30 feet, more than enough for the cabin they planned. "Good first day," Seth said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "The first of many," Zara agreed. They set up camp near the building site, and that evening, as they sat by their fire eating beans and cornbread, Zara felt a contentment she had never experienced before. This was her land. This would be her home. And she would build it with a man who had somehow, in just over a week, become essential to her happiness. Over the following weeks, they fell into a rhythm. Each day began at dawn with breakfast over the campfire, then a full day of work on the cabin. Seth proved to be an excellent carpenter, and he taught Zara as they went. Together, they dug the foundation trenches, laid the first logs, notched and fitted each piece with care. The people of Linden proved to be good neighbors. Several families came out to help raise the walls in what they called a cabin raising, bringing food and extra hands. By the end of that day, the walls were up, and the roof frame was in place. Zara cooked for everyone using her precious stores, making a massive pot of stew that everyone declared delicious. As people were leaving, one of the neighbor women, Mrs. Colby, pulled Zara aside. "I hope you do not mind me saying," she began carefully, "but people are starting to talk. You and Mr. Hardwick are living out here alone together, and while I can see he is a gentleman, it does not look proper." Zara felt her cheeks flush. "We have separate bedrolls," she said, "and we are planning to marry. We just wanted to wait until the cabin was finished." Mrs. Colby's expression softened. "I understand, dear, and I am not judging you, but frontier life is hard enough without adding scandal to it. Have you considered having the wedding sooner?" That evening, Zara raised the subject with Seth. To her surprise, his response was immediate and enthusiastic. "I would marry you tomorrow if you wanted," he said. "I have been patient because I thought that was what you needed, but Zara, I already know you are the woman I want to spend my life with. The sooner we make it official, the happier I will be." "You mean it?" Zara asked, her heart swelling. "Every word," Seth replied. He took her hands in his. "Marry me, Zara. Not because people are gossiping, but because I love you. Because waking up next to you for the rest of my life sounds like the closest thing to heaven I can imagine." "I love you too," Zara said, the words coming easily because they were absolutely true. "Yes, I will marry you. Yes, yes, yes." They rode into town the next morning and spoke with the minister, Reverend Thompson, who agreed to perform the ceremony that Sunday. Zara had been worried she would not have time to make a proper dress, but Mrs. Patterson from the boarding house came to her rescue, offering to lend her a beautiful blue dress that had belonged to her daughter. "She married last year and moved to Missouri," Mrs. Patterson explained. She told me to keep it for someone who needed it. I think you are that someone." The week passed in a blur of activity. They continued working on the cabin during the day, and in the evenings, Zara worked on altering the dress to fit her. Seth disappeared into town one afternoon and returned with a new shirt and vest, looking almost bashful at the purchase. "Figured I should look presentable when I marry the most beautiful woman in Kansas," he explained. Sunday arrived with perfect weather, sunny but not too hot. Zara dressed carefully in Mrs. Patterson's blue dress, which fit perfectly after her alterations. She wore her mother's simple gold locket, the only piece of jewelry she owned, and Mrs. Colby helped arrange her dark hair into an elegant style. When she walked into the small church, she saw that most of the town had turned out for the wedding. But she only had eyes for Seth, who stood at the front next to Reverend Thompson. He looked handsome and slightly uncomfortable in his new clothes, but when he saw her, his face lit up with such joy that Zara felt her own happiness overflow. The ceremony was simple but beautiful. They recited their vows in steady voices, promising to love and cherish each other through all the challenges that lay ahead. When Reverend Thompson pronounced them husband and wife, Seth kissed her with a tenderness that made Zara's knees weak. The townspeople had organized a reception in the church hall, with food and music and dancing. Zara found herself swept up in the celebration, dancing with Seth, and then with various townsmen who wanted to welcome her properly to the community. But her favorite moment came late in the evening when Seth pulled her aside for a private moment. "Are you happy?" he asked, his hands warm on her waist. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Zara replied honestly. "A month ago I was alone and scared, stuck in the mud and wondering if I would survive. Now I have a husband, a home, and a future. It feels like a miracle." "You are the miracle," Seth said softly. "You are brave and strong and stubborn, and you never gave up even when you had every reason to." "I am the lucky one, Zara. I got to find you, to help you, to love you. That is the real miracle." They returned to their homestead that evening as husband and wife. Seth had finished the cabin door earlier in the week, and now he insisted on carrying Zara over the threshold, making her laugh with his mock-serious expression. The cabin was still rough, with a dirt floor and no interior walls yet. But it had a roof, a fireplace, and a real bed frame that Seth had built as a surprise. They had a proper mattress now, too, stuffed with prairie grass and covered with quilts that several neighbor women had given them as wedding gifts. That night, lying in Seth's arms in their own home on their own land, Zara felt a completeness she had never known existed. Seth held her close, his strong arms creating a shelter that felt safer than any building. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Seth replied, his deep voice rumbling through his chest. "And I am going to spend the rest of my life showing you just how much." The following months were full of hard work, but also deep satisfaction. They finished the interior of the cabin, adding a loft for storage and eventual children, building furniture, and making the space truly theirs. Seth proved to be skilled at nearly everything he attempted, from installing glass windows he had ordered from Kansas City to building a chicken coop and barn for the livestock they gradually acquired. Zara threw herself into establishing a garden, breaking the stubborn prairie sod and creating neat rows for vegetables. She planted everything her mother had taught her about, plus new crops recommended by their neighbors. Potatoes, carrots, beans, squash, corn, and even a few precious tomato plants. She also started herb beds near the kitchen door, growing sage, thyme, and mint. They acquired a milk cow from a neighbor, chickens for eggs, and Seth began talking about pigs for next year. The homestead was coming together piece by piece, exactly as Zara had dreamed. But more than the physical progress, it was their life together that made Zara truly happy. Seth was everything she had hoped for in a husband and more. He was strong and protective, but also gentle and affectionate. He made her laugh with his dry humor, and he listened to her opinions with genuine interest. They worked side by side during the day and fell into each other's arms at night, their passion for each other growing deeper with time. They also established traditions. Every Sunday after church, they would walk to the creek and have a picnic, talking about their dreams for the future. Every evening, they would sit together on the porch Seth had built, watching the sunset and discussing the day's accomplishments and challenges. And every time they came back to the spot where they had first met, where Zara's wagon had been stuck in the mud, Seth would pull her close and thank fate for that muddy day. As autumn arrived, painting the prairie in shades of gold and rust, Zara realized she had missed her monthly courses twice. She waited another week to be sure, then shared the news with Seth one evening as they sat by the fireplace. "I think I am with child," she said, her hand instinctively moving to her still flat stomach. Seth's eyes widened, and then he let out a whoop of joy that probably woke the chickens. He picked Zara up and spun her around, both of them laughing. "A baby," he said, his voice full of wonder. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Zara asked, though she could see the answer on his face. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Seth replied, kneeling down to press a kiss to her belly. "We are starting a family, Zara, building something that will last long after we are gone. This is everything I never knew I wanted." They spent the winter preparing for the baby's arrival. Seth built a beautiful cradle from cherry wood he had traded for in town, carving intricate designs into the headboard. Zara sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her hands moving automatically through patterns her mother had taught her years ago. The neighbor women came to visit regularly, offering advice and assistance. The winter was harsh, with bitter winds and heavy snows, but their cabin was warm and snug. Seth had chinked every gap between the logs, and the fireplace he had built drew perfectly. They spent the long evenings reading aloud to each other from the few books they owned, or Seth would tell stories about his years in the mountains while Zara worked on her sewing. In late February, when the snow was still thick on the ground, Zara went into labor. Seth rode like a demon to fetch Mrs. Colby, who had experience with birthing, and then spent the next 12 hours pacing outside the cabin like a caged animal. Mrs. Patterson had come too, along with 2 other women from town, and they firmly banished him from the birthing room. When he finally heard the thin wail of a newborn, Seth burst through the door despite the women's protests. Zara lay exhausted but smiling in their bed, holding a small bundle wrapped in blankets. "It is a boy," she said softly. "We have a son." Seth approached slowly, almost reverently. When he looked down at the tiny red face of his son, Zara saw tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. "He is perfect," Seth whispered. "Absolutely perfect." They named him James after Seth's father. Little James proved to be a healthy, loud baby with a strong appetite and stronger lungs. Seth was completely smitten, spending hours just watching his son sleep, refusing to let Zara do all the night feedings despite her protests. "You grew him and birthed him," Seth said firmly. "The least I can do is hold him when he cries at night." As spring arrived and the prairie burst into bloom, Zara often found herself standing on their porch, James in her arms, looking out at the land they had built into a home. The garden was greening up beautifully, the animals were healthy, and the cabin had additions that Seth had built over the winter. They had everything they needed and more. Seth would come up behind her at these moments, wrapping his arms around both her and their son, and Zara would lean back into his strength, marveling at how much her life had changed in less than a year. "You ever regret it?" she asked one day. "Giving up the mountains for this?" Seth was quiet for a moment, considering. "I thought the mountains were where I belonged," he finally said. "Thought I needed that solitude, that wildness, but I was wrong. I belong wherever you are, Zara. You and James, this land, this life we are building together, this is what I was always meant to find. I just did not know it until I saw you stuck in that mud, too stubborn to give up." "Best mud I ever got stuck in," Zara said with a laugh. "Amen to that," Seth agreed, kissing the top of her head. The years that followed were full of both challenges and joys. There were droughts that withered crops, winters that were brutal in their intensity, and the constant hard work that frontier life demanded. But there were also births of more children. 2 daughters they named Grace and Hope, and another son they called Thomas. The homestead grew and prospered with fields of wheat and corn, a growing herd of cattle, and orchards that Seth planted with Zara's help. They became pillars of the Linden community. Seth served on the town council and helped organize a volunteer fire brigade. Zara started a school for the homesteaders' children who lived too far from town to attend the regular school, teaching them reading and arithmetic in her front room during the winter months. Their children grew up strong and healthy, running wild across the prairie under the watchful eyes of their parents. James inherited his father's size and strength, while Grace got her mother's determination. Hope was the gentle peacemaker, and little Thomas was the mischief maker who kept them all on their toes. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Seth surprised Zara by taking her back to the exact spot where he had pulled her wagon from the mud. The road had been improved over the years, and the muddy spot was now a well-maintained section of the trail, but they both remembered exactly where it had happened. "I think about that day a lot," Seth said, holding her hand as they stood in the tall grass. "About all the things that had to happen for us to meet. If it had not rained, if you had not gotten stuck, if I had taken a different route to town, we might never have found each other." "I think we would have found each other eventually," Zara said with conviction. "Some things are meant to be, Seth. You and me, we were always meant to find each other. That mud just helped speed things along." Seth pulled her into his arms, and they stood there for a long time, 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built a love that would last a lifetime. When they were old, sitting on the porch of the larger house Seth had built to accommodate their growing family, they would tell their children and grandchildren the story of how they met. About a young woman alone and desperate, trying to free her wagon from the mud. About a mountain man who pulled it free and then walked beside her for miles, never knowing that each step was leading him toward the home he had always been seeking. And their grandchildren would listen wide-eyed, asking them to tell it again, to describe exactly how strong Grandpa had been, how brave Grandma had been, how they had fallen in love while walking across the prairie. Zara would catch Seth's eye during these tellings, and they would share a look that spoke of decades of love, of challenges overcome together, of a partnership that had weathered every storm. And she would remember that desperate day when she thought all was lost, when she was alone and frightened and stuck in the mud. That was the day her real life had begun. The day a mountain man had appeared on the horizon and changed everything. The day she had started the journey that led her not just to Linden, Kansas, but to love, to family, to a home that she and Seth had built together with their own hands and their own hearts. Seth had pulled her wagon from the mud that day, but the truth was, they had saved each other. She had given him a reason to leave the lonely mountains and rejoin humanity. He had given her the strength and support to fulfill her father's dream and create something even better than she had imagined. As the sun set over the Kansas prairie on another beautiful evening, James and Grace were helping with the evening chores while Hope practiced her reading, and Thomas played with the barn cats. Zara leaned against Seth's shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady strength that had been her anchor for so many years. "I love you," she said, as she had said countless times before. "I love you too," Seth replied, as he always did. "Today, tomorrow, and for all the days that come after." And in that moment, surrounded by the life they had built together on 40 acres of Kansas prairie, Zara knew that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The journey that had started with a wagon stuck in mud had led her home to a love deeper than she had ever dreamed possible, to a partnership that had created not just a homestead but a legacy that would endure for generations. The mud had been a blessing in disguise. The miles Seth had walked beside her wagon had been the first steps of a lifetime spent walking together. And every day since had been a gift, a testament to the power of two people who found each other at exactly the right moment and chose to build something beautiful together. As darkness fell, and they finally headed inside to their warm home filled with the sounds of their children, Zara took one last look at the land that had become theirs. The land where she had buried her father's dreams and then resurrected them into something even more magnificent. The land where she had found not just a home, but a love that would last forever. And she sent up a silent prayer of thanks for muddy roads, for mountain men with gentle hearts, for the courage to keep going when everything seemed impossible, and for the chance to build a life with the man who had pulled her wagon free and then walked beside her through all the miles that followed. Their story was one that would be told and retold, passed down through generations of their family. A reminder that sometimes the greatest love stories begin in the most unexpected places, and that the right person can change your entire world in the time it takes to pull a wagon from the mud and offer to walk beside you for a while. Seth and Zara lived long, full lives, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and eventually great-grandchildren. They worked their land until they were too old to do more than supervise, and then they sat on their porch and watched younger hands continue the work they had started. They never regretted a single moment, never wished they had chosen differently. Because on that day when Seth Hardwick found Zara Everly trying to pull her wagon from the mud, when he pulled it free and walked beside her for miles, they had both found something more precious than gold, more valuable than land, more lasting than any structure they could build. They had found each other, and that made all the difference.